My housekeeper called from my house saying, "Your daughter just told me she hasn't eaten in 3 days." The call came while I was in a meeting with 12 board members discussing quarterly projections. Rosa had worked for my family for 8 years and never called during work hours unless something was seriously wrong. I excused myself and stepped into the hallway. "What do you mean she hasn't eaten?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Rosa's voice was shaking on the other end. "Lily told me her new mommy said she's too fat and needs to learn control. She's been sneaking crackers from my purse when I clean her room." My daughter was 7 years old and weighed 48 pounds, which her pediatrician said was perfectly healthy. I'd married Diane 4 months ago after dating for a year. She'd been nothing but sweet to Lily during our courtship, always bringing her little gifts and taking her for ice cream. "Where is Diane now?" I asked, already grabbing my keys. "She left for her yoga class 20 minutes ago, but there's something else. Lily has bruises on her arms. She said she fell, but they look like finger marks." My blood went cold. Rosa had raised 4 kids of her own and knew what abuse looked like. I told her to keep Lily calm and that I was coming home immediately. The drive usually took 30 minutes, but I made it in 18. When I walked through the door, Lily ran to me and wrapped her arms around my legs. She was thinner than I remembered from just last week when I'd been traveling for business. Rosa stood in the kitchen doorway with tears in her eyes. "Show me the bruises, sweetie." I knelt down and gently rolled up Lily's sleeves. 5 purple marks on each arm, exactly where someone would grab a small child. My ex-wife had died 2 years ago in a car accident, and I thought Diane would be the mother figure Lily needed. "When did Diane do this?" I asked, keeping my voice soft so I wouldn't scare her more. "This morning when I asked for breakfast. She said I was getting chunky and grabbed me really hard. She does it when you're at work, Daddy." The front door opened and Diane walked in carrying her yoga mat and green juice. She saw us all standing there and immediately put on her concerned face. "What's wrong? Did something happen?" She rushed over, trying to hug Lily, who pressed herself against me. "Rosa says Lily hasn't been eating." I watched her face carefully. She rolled her eyes and laughed. "Oh, that's ridiculous. Kids are so dramatic. She eats plenty, I just don't let her gorge herself like before. Someone needs to teach her healthy habits." Rosa stepped forward then, which surprised me because she usually stayed quiet around Diane. "The child asked me for food from my purse. That's not being dramatic, that's being hungry." Diane's face changed and she turned on Rosa. "Maybe if you spent less time gossiping with her and more time cleaning like you're paid to do, this wouldn't be an issue." That's when I saw something I hadn't noticed before. Lily's school backpack was in the corner, and it was Thursday at 2 p.m. "Why isn't Lily at school?" I asked Diane. She waved her hand dismissively. "She had a stomachache this morning, so I kept her home. Probably from trying to sneak food last night." But Rosa shook her head. "She hasn't been to school all week. I checked with the office yesterday when I noticed her here." Diane's story was falling apart. "You checked with her school? That's not your job. You're overstepping." She was getting angry now and moved toward Rosa. Lily whimpered and pressed harder against me. "Daddy, she hits Rosa too. When Rosa tries to give me food." That changed everything. Rosa pulled up her sleeve and showed me a bruise on her forearm. "Last Tuesday when I tried to make Lily a sandwich." Diane grabbed the plate, and when I didn't let go, she twisted my arm. I'd been blind to what was happening in my own house. The signs were there, but I'd been too busy with work and too trusting of the woman I'd married. "Pack your things and get out," I said to Diane. She laughed, thinking I was joking. "You're seriously going to believe the help over your wife?" But then Rosa did something I didn't expect. She pulled out her phone and turned the screen toward me. The first photo showed Lily's lunch from Monday sitting untouched in the trash can. The second showed the pantry door with a new lock installed at the top where a child couldn't reach. The third showed Diane's yoga class schedule printed out with notes in her handwriting about when she'd be gone and Lily would be alone. Rosa swiped through 15 more photos showing thrown-away food, locked cabinets, and timestamps proving Diane left for hours every day while keeping Lily home from the school. My hands shook as I looked at the evidence my housekeeper had been collecting while I flew to business meetings and trusted my wife to care for my daughter. Rosa had known something was wrong 2 weeks ago, and instead of just telling me, she'd documented everything because she understood Diane would lie, and I might not believe her without proof. Diane's face went completely white when she saw the photos on Rosa's phone. For about 3 seconds, she just stood there frozen. Then her expression changed into something ugly and angry. She spun toward Rosa and started yelling about spying and violating privacy, demanding I fire her immediately for taking unauthorized photos in our home. She pulled out her own phone and threatened to call the police right now to report Rosa for illegal surveillance and harassment. But her voice was too high, and her hands were shaking, and I could see the panic behind the rage. She wasn't angry about privacy. She was terrified because everything Rosa had documented was real, and now there was proof she couldn't deny or explain away. I told Diane to pack a bag and go stay somewhere else tonight while I figured this out. She laughed like I was joking and said this was her house too, that she had legal rights as my wife. She kept talking about how I was overreacting to normal parenting and a child's dramatic stories, that Rosa was just jealous of her position in the family and trying to cause problems. I wasn't listening anymore because I was already pulling out my phone to call my brother. I didn't trust Diane alone with Lily for even one more minute, and I needed backup to make sure she actually left. Diane saw me dialing and tried to grab my phone, but I turned away and my brother answered on the second ring. My brother lived 20 minutes away and said he was leaving right now. I stayed on the phone with him while Diane paced around the living room getting more and more angry. She kept switching between crying about how unfair I was being and yelling about Rosa overstepping her place. Lily stayed pressed against my legs the whole time, not saying anything but gripping my pants so tight her knuckles were white. Rosa stood near the kitchen with her arms crossed, watching Diane carefully like she expected her to try something. When we heard my brother's truck pull into the driveway, Diane's whole attitude changed, and she suddenly got very calm and cold. My brother came through the front door and took in the scene in about 2 seconds. He looked at Lily's thin face and the bruises on her arms that were still visible, then looked at Diane with an expression that made her step backward. He didn't say anything, just stood next to me with his arms crossed, and his presence seemed to take up the whole room. Diane grabbed her purse and yoga mat with jerky movements and walked toward the door. She stopped and looked back at Rosa with pure hatred in her eyes, then told me I'd regret believing the help over my own wife. The door slammed so hard behind her that the windows rattled and a picture frame fell off the wall. I sat down on the couch and pulled Lily onto my lap while Rosa sat in the chair across from us. For a few minutes, nobody said anything. Then I asked Lily to tell me everything that had been happening. She started crying, but she talked, telling me about being put on the scale every single morning before breakfast and having her weight written down in a notebook. She described how Diane photographed every meal and criticized everything she ate, calling her chunky and saying she needed to learn control like other girls her age. Diane had called her fat and disgusting multiple times, telling her that her real mom Audrey had been naturally thin and beautiful, unlike Lily, who was getting bigger every day. Rosa added details about Diane's obsession with Lily's body, explaining how she'd tried to force a 7-year-old to do exercise routines and wouldn't let her have snacks or seconds at dinner. She talked about Diane constantly comparing Lily to other children and saying Audrey would be disappointed in how Lily was letting herself go. I looked at the clock and saw it was already 8 at night, but I called Lily's pediatrician anyway. Dr. Moody had given me his cell number years ago when Lily was sick with pneumonia and told me to use it if I ever needed him urgently. He answered on the 3rd ring, and I could hear his kids in the background, but when I explained about the bruises and starvation, he got very quiet and serious. He said to bring Lily in first thing tomorrow morning at 7 before his regular patients arrived. Then he explained that as a mandated reporter, if he found evidence of abuse and malnutrition, he would have to contact Child Protective Services immediately. I told him I understood, and I wanted him to do exactly that because my daughter needed the system to protect her now. That night, I made Lily her favorite mac and cheese from the blue box she loved. She got excited when she saw me cooking it and sat at the kitchen table watching me stir the pot. But when I put the bowl in front of her, she only ate about 5 small bites before pushing it away and saying her stomach hurt. She looked scared like she'd done something wrong, and I had to tell her it was okay and she wasn't in trouble. Rosa explained that after 3 days without real food, Lily's stomach had shrunk, and we needed to give her small amounts every few hours, or she'd get sick. She said we should start with crackers and broth tonight, then slowly add back regular food over the next few days. I hated that my housekeeper knew more about caring for my starved child than I did, that she understood the physical effects of what Diane had done while I'd been completely blind to all of it. I set up sleeping bags in the living room because Lily said she didn't want to sleep in her room alone. Rosa started to leave, but I asked her to stay, and she called her daughter to say she wouldn't be home tonight. The 3 of us spread out the sleeping bags, and I put on Disney movies that Lily picked from our collection. She fell asleep around 10:30, curled up between me and Rosa, her breathing finally steady and calm. I stayed awake the whole night watching her sleep and thinking about every sign I'd missed over the past 4 months. All the business trips I'd taken, the late nights at the office, the weekends I'd spent on conference calls instead of paying attention to what was happening in my own house. I'd been so focused on building my company and making money that I'd let a monster into our home and given her complete access to my daughter. Dr. Moody's office opened at 7, and we were waiting in the parking lot when he arrived. He took us straight to an exam room, and his face got harder and harder as he examined Lily. He documented every bruise with photos and measurements, noting the exact size and color and shape of each mark on her arms. He weighed her and checked her chart, then told me she'd lost 4 pounds in the past month, which was significant for a child her size. The bruising was consistent with grab marks from adult hands, and when he asked Lily gentle questions about food and eating, she showed clear signs of anxiety and fear. He wrote everything down in her file very carefully, then explained to both of us that what had happened to Lily was child abuse, and he had a legal duty to report it. The doctor picked up his office phone right there while we were still in the room and called Child Protective Services. He gave them a detailed report of everything he'd found, using medical terms I didn't fully understand, but that sounded serious and official. A caseworker named Jennifer said she'd be at my house within 2 hours to interview everyone and assess the situation. Dr. Moody hung up and told me this was good, that the system was designed to protect children like Lily now. He said CPS would investigate thoroughly and make sure Diane couldn't hurt her anymore, and that I should cooperate fully with everything they asked. I thanked him and carried Lily out to the car, knowing that whatever came next, at least my daughter was finally safe and people were paying attention to what had been done to her. I drove straight to my office with Lily in the back seat and Rosa following in her car. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel, but I needed to get somewhere safe where I could think clearly and make the right calls. The office building was mostly empty on a Thursday afternoon, and I used my key card to take us up to the executive floor. I set Lily up in the glass conference room with Rosa, pulling out the snack drawer I kept for late nights and letting her pick whatever she wanted. She grabbed 3 granola bars and a bag of chips, eating slowly like she was afraid someone would take them away. Rosa sat next to her and pulled up games on the iPad while I went to my office and closed the door. Kurt Pendleton had been my attorney for 10 years, handling everything from business contracts to my prenup with Diane. He answered on the second ring, and I told him everything in one long, rushed explanation. The bruises, the starvation, Rosa's photos, the school absences, all of it. He was quiet for a moment, then asked me to send him the photos Rosa had taken. I texted them from Rosa's phone while he waited on the line. When he came back, his voice was hard and focused. He said we needed to file for emergency custody modification immediately, that Diane had no biological or adoptive rights to Lily, and we could get her removed from the home today. The relief that hit me was so strong I had to sit down. Kurt explained that because I was Lily's biological father, and Diane was only a step-parent of 4 months, the court would absolutely protect my custody rights. He was already opening his computer and drafting paperwork for a restraining order and emergency hearing. He told me to document everything, take more photos if needed, and not communicate with Diane except through lawyers from this point forward. No texts, no calls, no conversations, nothing. Every word I said to her could be used against me, and I needed to let the legal system handle this now. I thanked him and hung up, then called Jennifer back to tell her we had legal representation and were filing for emergency custody. She said the caseworker would still need to come do the interviews today, but having an attorney was smart and showed I was taking this seriously. The caseworker arrived at my house 2 hours later. Her name was printed on her badge, but she introduced herself again as Jennifer and shook my hand with a firm grip that felt professional and kind at the same time. She had a leather folder and a camera and asked to speak with Rosa first. I showed her to the kitchen where Rosa was making Lily a sandwich, and Jennifer asked me to wait in another room so Rosa could speak freely. I sat in the living room with Lily, who was watching cartoons, but kept looking at me like she was worried I would leave. The interview took almost an hour, and I could hear Rosa's voice through the wall, steady and clear as she explained everything. When Jennifer came out, she had pages of notes and asked to see the pantry. Rosa showed her the lock Diane had installed, a heavy padlock with a key that Diane kept on her keychain. Jennifer took photos of it from multiple angles, then asked Rosa to show her the bruise on her arm. Rosa rolled up her sleeve and Jennifer photographed that too, using a ruler to show the size and taking close-ups that captured the purple and yellow marks. Rosa explained how Diane had grabbed the plate when she tried to make Lily a sandwich last Tuesday, how when Rosa didn't let go, Diane twisted her arm hard enough to leave marks. Jennifer wrote everything down and asked specific questions about dates, times, and what Diane said during these incidents. Then she asked to interview me. We sat at the dining room table, and Jennifer opened a fresh page in her notebook. She asked me to walk her through my relationship with Diane, how we met, how long we dated, what the courtship was like. I explained that we'd dated for a year, and she'd seemed perfect, always kind to Lily, always bringing gifts and planning fun activities. Jennifer asked about my work schedule, and I had to admit I traveled 2 or 3 times a month, sometimes for a week at a time. She asked who watched Lily during those trips, and I said Rosa was here during the day, and Diane was supposed to be the primary caregiver at night and on weekends. Jennifer's pen moved across the page, and she asked how I missed the signs. That question hit me hard because I'd been asking myself the same thing since Rosa's call. I told her I trusted Diane because she seemed so loving during our courtship that I wanted Lily to have a mother figure after losing Audrey. I said I was blind to what was happening because I was focused on work and thought my daughter was in good hands. Jennifer was kind, but her face was serious as she noted that my work schedule contributed to the situation. She asked about my plans to be more present going forward, and I told her I was taking a leave of absence starting today, that Lily would be my only priority until she was safe and healing. Jennifer seemed satisfied with that answer and closed her notebook. The hardest part came next. Jennifer needed to interview Lily, and she asked me to observe through the one-way mirror in the formal dining room. She'd set up a camera and recording equipment to document everything properly. I stood behind the glass watching my daughter sit at the table with this stranger, and Jennifer was so gentle with her that I felt grateful and sick at the same time. She started by asking Lily about her favorite things, her favorite color and food and TV show. Lily relaxed a little and started talking more freely. Then Jennifer brought out anatomical dolls and explained that sometimes it's easier to show things than to say them. She asked Lily if anyone had ever hurt her, and Lily nodded. Jennifer asked her to show on the doll where she'd been hurt. Lily picked up the girl doll and pointed to the arms, then demonstrated how Diane would grab her by squeezing the doll's arms with both hands. Jennifer asked what would happen when Diane grabbed her like that, and Lily said she would shake her and tell her she was getting fat. She said Diane would squeeze really hard when Lily asked for food or cried about being hungry. Jennifer asked if there were other times Diane hurt her, and Lily described being kept home from the school when she cried too much, being locked in her room during the day, being weighed every morning and yelled at if the number went up. My daughter's voice was small and scared as she talked about these things, and I had to press my hand against the glass to keep from breaking through it and pulling her out of there. Jennifer asked gentle questions about food and eating, and Lily explained that Diane said she needed to learn control, that her mommy Audrey had been naturally thin, and Lily needed to work harder. She said Diane threw away her school lunches and wouldn't let Rosa make her breakfast. Jennifer photographed Lily's arms again with better lighting and took measurements of each bruise. She asked Lily to demonstrate on the doll how Diane would shake her when she was angry. Lily held the doll by the arms and moved it back and forth, her small hands showing exactly what had been done to her. By the end of the day, Jennifer had 3 hours of interviews, dozens of photos, and pages of detailed notes. She sat with me in the living room and explained that CPS was opening a formal investigation and supporting my request for emergency custody orders. She said the evidence was clear that Lily had been abused and neglected, that the bruises and weight loss and school absences all painted a picture of serious harm. Jennifer explained that Diane could not return to the home or have any unsupervised contact with Lily, and that CPS would be monitoring our family for the next 6 months. They would do regular check-ins to make sure Lily was safe and that I was following through on being more present. She asked if I understood the seriousness of this, and I said I did, that I would do whatever it took to help my daughter heal. Jennifer packed up her equipment and gave me her card, telling me to call if anything else came up or if Diane tried to contact Lily. She said the formal report would be filed tonight, and Kurt would have a copy by morning. Kurt called me at 7 that evening to say he'd gotten us an emergency hearing scheduled for Monday morning. 3 days away. He explained that was incredibly fast and showed the court was taking this seriously. He said we needed character witnesses, people who could testify about changes in Lily's behavior over the past 4 months since Diane moved in. I started making a list of everyone who knew Lily well. Her teacher, our neighbors, the parents of her friends from the school. Kurt told me to call them all tonight and ask if they'd be willing to provide statements or appear in court. He said we needed to show a pattern of Diane's behavior and how it affected Lily, that multiple witnesses would strengthen our case significantly. I spent the next 2 hours on the phone making calls. Some people were shocked and immediately agreed to help. Others seemed uncomfortable and said they didn't want to get involved. I wrote down everyone who agreed and sent the list to Kurt. Lily's school principal called me back within an hour of my voicemail. Her name was Mrs. Brenner, and she'd been at the school for 15 years. She said she'd been concerned about Lily for weeks now and was planning to call me next week. Lily had missed a full week of school with no proper documentation, and when she was there, she seemed withdrawn and stopped eating lunch. Mrs. Brenner said she'd noticed Lily asking classmates for food, and one teacher reported seeing her eat crackers out of the trash can during recess. The principal had documented all of this and would gladly provide statements and appear in court if needed. She asked how Lily was doing now, and I told her she was safe at home with me and Rosa. Mrs. Brenner said she was relieved and asked me to let her know if the school could help in any way. I thanked her and hung up feeling worse about how long this had gone on. All these adults had noticed something was wrong, and I'd been completely blind to it. That weekend, I barely left Lily's side. I canceled all my work calls except for 2 that absolutely couldn't wait, and even those I took from home with Lily sitting next to me coloring. Rosa came over both days even though I told her she didn't have to work weekends. She said she wanted to help and started researching child therapists who specialized in trauma and abuse recovery. We made a list of 5 possibilities, and Rosa called each one to ask about their approach and availability. Most had waiting lists of several weeks, but one doctor named Maddie Pendleton said she could squeeze us in for an initial assessment on Monday afternoon. Rosa booked the appointment right away and wrote down all the intake information. I was grateful to have her help because I felt overwhelmed by everything that needed to happen. Legal proceedings, therapy, school coordination, all of it was moving so fast, and I needed to make sure I didn't miss anything important. My phone started buzzing constantly on Saturday morning. Diane was texting me dozens of messages, and I had to force myself not to read them right away. Kurt had told me to screenshot everything but not respond, so I opened each one just long enough to capture it, then closed the app. The messages started with apologies. She said she was sorry for being too strict, that she was just trying to help Lily be healthy like I wanted. Then they shifted to anger. She accused Rosa of lying and manipulating me, said Rosa was jealous and wanted to break up our marriage. She called Rosa terrible names and said I was a fool for believing a housekeeper over my own wife. Then the messages turned desperate and sad. Diane said she loved Lily and me so much, that we were her whole world, that she couldn't live without us. She begged me to call her so we could work this out like adults. The shifting tones and stories were exactly what Kurt said would happen. I sent him screenshots of all 53 messages, and he replied that this was perfect evidence of manipulation and instability. He told me to keep my phone on silent and just screenshot anything new without reading it carefully. On Sunday evening around 7 o'clock, the doorbell rang while Lily and I were eating dinner at the kitchen table. Rosa had gone home an hour earlier after making us chicken soup and grilled cheese sandwiches. I looked through the peephole and saw a woman in her 60s with Diane's same sharp features and blonde hair. She wore expensive clothes and had that same fake smile Diane used when she wanted something. I opened the door but kept the chain lock on. The woman's smile got bigger when she saw me. She introduced herself as Marlena Dillon and said she needed to talk about her daughter. I told her through the crack in the door that there was nothing to discuss and she should leave. Marlena's face changed and she pushed against the door. She started talking fast about how Diane would never hurt a child, that Rosa must have made everything up because she was jealous and wanted to break up my marriage. I pulled out my phone and started recording the conversation without telling her. Marlena kept going, saying Rosa probably took those photos herself and bruised Lily on purpose to frame Diane. She called Rosa terrible names and said housekeepers like her couldn't be trusted around children. I told Marlena she had 30 seconds to get off my property, or I was calling the police. She tried one more time, saying I was ruining her daughter's life over lies from a servant. I closed the door and locked it, then called Kurt to tell him about the visit and send him the recording. He said it was perfect evidence of Diane's family trying to intimidate witnesses, and he would use it in court tomorrow. The emergency custody hearing started at 9 Monday morning, in a small courtroom with gray walls and uncomfortable wooden benches. Kurt sat next to me at one table, while Diane and her lawyer sat at another table across the aisle. Diane wore a conservative dress and had her hair pulled back, trying to look like a responsible parent. The judge was a woman in her 50s named Judge Hartley, who looked tired and annoyed before we even started. Kurt stood up first and laid out everything in order. He showed the judge the medical report from Dr. Moody, documenting Lily's weight loss and bruises. He presented Rosa's photos of the locked pantry and the meals thrown away. He had written statements from the school principal about Lily's absences and behavior changes. He showed the CPS report with their findings and recommendations. Diane's lawyer tried to interrupt several times, but Judge Hartley told him to wait his turn. When Kurt finished, Diane's lawyer stood up and tried to claim this was all a big misunderstanding about different parenting styles. He said Diane was just trying to teach Lily healthy eating habits, and the bruises were accidents. Judge Hartley cut him off before he got very far. She said the medical evidence was clear and the photos didn't lie. She granted me full emergency custody of Lily right there and issued a restraining order requiring Diane to stay 500 feet away from both Lily and our house. Diane's face went white, and her lawyer tried to argue, but the judge wasn't having it. Judge Hartley kept talking and said Diane could only have supervised visitation if she completed parenting classes and anger management courses. She made it clear that wouldn't even be considered for at least 6 months, and only if Diane showed real progress. Diane started crying then, saying this wasn't fair, and she loved Lily like her own daughter. The judge looked at her hard and said the evidence of starvation and physical abuse was crystal clear. She told Diane she was lucky criminal charges weren't being filed yet, but that could change depending on what the police investigation found. Diane's lawyer tried to comfort her, but she pushed him away and kept crying. I felt nothing watching her fall apart because all I could think about was Lily asking Rosa for crackers from her purse. The judge told us we were done and everyone could leave. Kurt shook my hand and said this was the best possible outcome we could have hoped for. Diane glared at me as she left the courtroom with her lawyer and mother, who had been sitting in the back row. After court ended around 11, I picked up Lily from Rosa's house where she had been staying during the hearing. We drove across town to meet Dr. Maddie Pendleton at her office in a building near the hospital. The waiting room had bright colors and toys scattered around, nothing like the serious medical offices I was used to. A woman in her 40s came out to greet us wearing casual clothes instead of a white coat. She knelt down to Lily's level and introduced herself, asking what Lily liked to do for fun. Lily said she liked to draw, and Dr. Pendleton's face lit up. She said they had lots of art supplies in her office, and maybe Lily could show her some drawings. Lily looked at me and I nodded, so she took Dr. Pendleton's hand, and they went into the office together. I sat in the waiting room for almost an hour looking at my phone and trying not to think about what Lily was telling her. When they came out, Lily was holding a drawing of our family with her, me, and Rosa, all holding hands under a rainbow. Dr. Pendleton asked if I could stay for a few minutes to talk while Lily played in the waiting room. We went into her office and she closed the door. She explained that Lily showed clear signs of trauma from what Diane did to her. The fear around food and eating was going to take time to work through. Lily would need to come see her once a week for at least 6 months, maybe longer depending on how things went. Dr. Pendleton said some kids recovered faster than others, but we shouldn't rush the process. That evening after I put Lily to bed, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. I answered, and a man's voice said his name was Detective Donovan Wiley from the police department. He told me they were opening a criminal investigation into child abuse and assault charges against Diane. The CPS report and medical evidence had been forwarded to them, and they needed to interview everyone involved. He wanted me, Rosa, and Lily to come to the police station to give formal statements. I asked when, and he said as soon as possible, maybe tomorrow or the next day. He warned me that criminal cases like this could take months to build and prosecute, but the evidence seemed strong enough to move forward. I thanked him and said we would cooperate fully with whatever he needed. After we hung up, I called Rosa to let her know about the detective, and she said she would be ready whenever they needed her. Then I called Kurt to tell him about the criminal investigation, and he said it was good news because it meant the state was taking this seriously. The next morning, I had a video call scheduled with my board of directors to discuss quarterly results. I logged on at 8 and saw all 12 faces on my screen looking impatient. The chairman asked where I had been the past few days and why I hadn't been responding to emails. I took a breath and told them I needed to take a leave of absence to focus on my daughter's recovery from abuse. The room went silent for a few seconds. Some of the board members looked concerned and asked if there was anything they could do to help. Others looked annoyed and started talking about quarterly projections and client meetings that couldn't be postponed. The chairman asked how long I would be gone, and I said at least a month, maybe longer. One of the board members said that wasn't acceptable given our current projects and deadlines. Something shifted in me then, and I realized I didn't care about their concerns anymore. I told them my daughter almost died from starvation in my own house while I was traveling for their quarterly numbers. I said they could figure out the projects without me, or they could fire me, but either way, I was done putting work before Lily. The chairman looked uncomfortable and said they would discuss it and get back to me. I ended the call without waiting for a response. 2 days later, Rosa and I went to the police station to give our formal statements to Detective Wiley. He was a tall man in his 50s with gray hair and kind eyes that had probably seen too much. He took us into separate interview rooms and I went first. I told him everything from the beginning, starting with how Diane acted during our courtship and how things changed after we got married. I explained about my work travel and how I missed all the signs. I described coming home and seeing the bruises on Lily's arms and hearing about the 3 days without food. Detective Wiley took notes and recorded everything on a small device. He asked detailed questions about specific dates and times, trying to build a timeline of the abuse. After an hour, he thanked me and said Rosa was next. I waited in the lobby while she gave her statement. When she came out 40 minutes later, her eyes were red like she had been crying. Detective Wiley walked with her and told us both that the photos Rosa took were crucial evidence. He said the bruise on Rosa's arm actually made the case stronger because it showed a pattern of violence and control beyond just what happened to Lily. Rosa looked surprised when he said that, like she hadn't thought about her own assault mattering in the legal process. Detective Wiley promised to keep us updated as the investigation moved forward. The next afternoon, Kurt called to say Diane's lawyer had sent over a proposed settlement. She would agree to the divorce and give up any claim to marital assets if I agreed not to pursue criminal charges against her. Kurt explained that I couldn't actually drop the criminal case because the state was prosecuting it, not me. But we could tell the district attorney whether we supported prosecution or not, which might influence their decisions. I didn't hesitate and told Kurt I absolutely supported prosecution. Diane had starved my daughter and hit Rosa, and I wanted her held accountable by the law. Kurt said he would communicate that to the DA and reject the settlement offer. He asked if I was sure because going through a trial would be hard on everyone, especially Lily. I said I was sure because letting Diane walk away with no consequences would be worse. I told Kurt to file for divorce immediately on grounds of abuse and fraud. He asked about the fraud part, and I explained that Diane clearly lied about who she was during our courtship. She hid her controlling and abusive tendencies until after we got married, and she had legal access to my home and daughter. Kurt said that was a solid argument, and he would include it in the filing. He warned me that Diane would probably fight the divorce and try to get spousal support, or a share of assets. I told him I didn't care what she tried, I just wanted her out of our lives permanently. Kurt said he would draft everything and file with the court by the end of the week. He estimated the divorce would take at least 6 months to finalize, maybe longer if Diane contested it. That night around 2 in the morning, I woke up to Lily screaming. I ran to her room and found her sitting up in bed crying and shaking. She was yelling that she was hungry and needed food, and someone had locked her in the pantry. I turned on the light and sat next to her, pulling her into my lap. She was still half asleep and didn't seem to recognize me at first. I kept saying her name softly and telling her she was safe at home with me. After a few minutes, she woke up fully and started crying harder, burying her face in my shirt. I carried her to the kitchen and made her a small snack of crackers and cheese. She ate it slowly while sitting on my lap at the table. When she finished, I asked if she wanted to talk about the dream. She said Diane had locked her in the pantry and told her she couldn't come out until she lost weight. She said in the dream she was so hungry it hurt, and nobody could hear her screaming. I held her and promised that Diane was gone and would never hurt her again. We went back to her room and I stayed there the rest of the night, sleeping on the floor next to her bed. In the morning, I called Dr. Pendleton and told her about the nightmare. She said it was a normal trauma response and that Lily's brain was processing what happened to her. She taught me some techniques for calming Lily when the nightmares happened again, because they probably would. Watching my daughter terrified in the middle of the night broke something in me that I knew would never fully heal. The school principal called 2 days later while I was making Lily breakfast. She wanted to check on Lily and asked how she was doing after everything that happened. I told her Lily was home recovering and starting therapy soon. The principal said she was glad to hear it, then mentioned something that caught me off guard. 2 other parents had reached out asking about our family situation because they were concerned. Diane had volunteered at every school event for the past 4 months, always bringing homemade treats and helping with classroom activities. She seemed so devoted and caring that people couldn't believe the abuse allegations. The principal said she wanted me to know that several parents were shocked and asking questions. I thanked her for letting me know and hung up feeling sick. Diane had been performing the role of perfect stepmother for everyone to see while starving my daughter at home. She knew exactly how to look good in public while hiding what she really was. My friend Jays called that afternoon and suggested we grab coffee to talk. I thought he wanted to check on me, but when we sat down, he started talking about how maybe I was overreacting. He said Diane probably just had different parenting ideas and that kids exaggerate when they're upset. I stared at him across the table, trying to process what he was saying. Jays had known Lily since she was born, and now he was suggesting I was blowing things out of proportion. I told him about the bruises, the 3 days without food, Rosa getting hit. He waved his hand and said every parent makes mistakes, and Diane was probably just stressed adjusting to stepmom life. I stood up and left money on the table for my coffee. I told Jays I didn't need friends who minimized child abuse and walked out. 2 other couple friends called over the next few days with similar comments about different parenting styles and giving Diane a chance to explain. I cut them all off and blocked their numbers. Rosa was folding laundry when I told her about losing these friendships. She looked up and said she never liked those people anyway, that they always treated her like she was invisible when they came over for dinner parties. Detective Wiley called a week after his initial visit to give me an update on the investigation. He said they had interviewed Diane, and she was sticking to her story that she was just encouraging healthy eating habits. She claimed the bruises on Lily's arms were accidental, that she had grabbed Lily to steady her when she stumbled. Her version made it sound like she was a concerned parent trying to help an overweight child develop better habits. But then Wiley told me something that changed everything. Diane's yoga instructor had provided a statement to the police. The instructor said Diane often complained during class about Lily being chunky and needing discipline. She had told other women in the class that Lily was spoiled and ate too much junk food, that someone needed to teach her control before she got fat like other kids. The instructor's statement directly contradicted Diane's claim that this was about health rather than punishment and control. Wiley said the yoga instructor's testimony would be crucial if charges were filed because it showed Diane's real attitude toward Lily. 3 weeks after Rose's phone call that started everything, I got another call from Detective Wiley. The district attorney had reviewed all the evidence and decided to file criminal charges against Diane. 1 count of child abuse for starving Lily and causing the bruises. 1 count of assault for hitting Rosa and twisting her arm. 1 count of child endangerment for keeping Lily out of school for a week with no valid reason. Wiley said Diane would be arrested later that day and would have to post bail. I asked what would happen next, and he explained the court process could take months. Diane was arrested that afternoon and posted bail within 3 hours. Kurt called to tell me the charges were public record now, and Diane's name would show up in background checks forever. Even if she somehow avoided conviction, the arrest record would follow her for the rest of her life. I felt a grim satisfaction knowing she couldn't hide what she did anymore. Kurt filed our divorce petition the next morning. He included detailed grounds for divorce based on abuse and fraud. The fraud argument was that Diane had lied about who she was during our entire courtship, hiding her controlling and violent nature until after we were married. Kurt warned me that Diane would probably fight the divorce and try to get money out of me. He was right. Her lawyer responded within days claiming Diane deserved spousal support and half of all marital assets even though we had only been married 4 months. Her lawyer argued that Diane had given up her job as a marketing coordinator to be a full-time stepmother to Lily. That part was technically true. Diane had quit her job 2 weeks after we got married, saying she wanted to focus on being there for Lily after school and during the day. But knowing what I knew now, she had used that time to isolate and abuse my daughter while I was at work. Kurt said we would fight every claim and that no judge would award her anything given the criminal charges and evidence of abuse. Kurt suggested I hire a forensic accountant to review our finances before the divorce proceeded. I agreed and brought in someone his firm recommended. The accountant spent 2 weeks going through every bank statement and credit card bill from the 4 months Diane and I were married. What she found made my blood boil. Diane had spent over $30,000 on herself in those 4 months. Weekly spa treatments that cost hundreds of dollars each time, designer clothes from stores I didn't even know existed, expensive dinners with her friends where she picked up the whole check. The accountant showed me receipts for a $3,000 handbag, $2,000 shoes, regular hair appointments that cost $500. Meanwhile, Diane had told me she was being frugal and domestic, that she was happy staying home and didn't need much. The spending pattern showed someone who married for money and lifestyle, not love. Someone who saw my daughter as an obstacle to her comfortable new life. 4 weeks after everything started, I took Lily back to Dr. Moody for a follow-up appointment. He weighed her and checked her overall health. She had gained back 2 pounds and he said that was excellent progress. Her appetite was returning to normal, and she was eating regular meals without the anxiety and fear she had before. I took Lily to see Dr. Pendleton later that same day for her weekly therapy session. Afterward, Pendleton called me into her office to talk. She said Lily was making really good progress in therapy and showing signs of healing. The biggest change was that Lily was starting to ask for food when she was hungry, instead of waiting for permission or hiding her needs. Pendleton explained that this seemed like such a basic thing, but it represented huge healing for Lily. It meant she was learning to trust again that her needs would be met, and that asking for food wouldn't result in punishment. I drove home feeling hopeful for the first time in weeks. Rosa and I sat down one evening after Lily went to bed to figure out a new routine. I couldn't keep traveling for work the way I used to, and leaving Lily with just Rosa. We needed both of us available as much as possible. I told my company I would work from home 3 days a week going forward, and only come into the office twice a week. Rosa adjusted her schedule so she came earlier on the days I went to the office and left earlier on the days I was home. That way Lily always had both of us around. It wasn't perfect, and I still had to travel occasionally for important meetings. But I hired an assistant at work to handle a lot of the tasks I used to do myself. Things like reviewing reports and attending lower-level meetings. The assistant cost money, but it freed up my time to be more present for Lily. Rosa seemed relieved to have me around more and not carry the whole weight of Lily's care by herself. 6 weeks after the initial incident, Diane's preliminary hearing happened at the courthouse. Kurt came with me even though it wasn't technically part of the divorce case. The hearing was to determine if there was enough evidence for the criminal charges to proceed to trial. The judge reviewed all the evidence including Dr. Moody's medical report, Rosa's photos, the school attendance records and statements from Rosa and the yoga instructor. Diane's lawyer argued that the evidence was circumstantial and that Diane had been trying to help Lily develop healthy habits. But the judge wasn't buying it. He said there was clearly sufficient evidence to proceed to trial on all 3 charges. Diane's lawyer immediately tried to negotiate a plea deal with the prosecutor. The prosecutor said no. Given that the victim was a 7-year-old child and that Diane had also assaulted Rosa, they weren't offering anything less than probation with mandatory counseling and a guilty plea that would go on her permanent record. Diane's lawyer said they would need time to consider the offer. I found a family therapist who specialized in complicated household dynamics. Her name was Dr. Reeves, and she agreed to work with Rosa, Lily, and me together. The first session was awkward because none of us were sure exactly what to say. Dr. Reeves asked Rosa how she felt about her role in our family and what had happened with Diane. Rosa was quiet for a long time before admitting that she sometimes felt powerless as just the housekeeper, even though she knew something was wrong with how Diane treated Lily. She said she didn't feel like it was her place to challenge Diane directly because Diane was my wife and Rosa was an employee. I felt terrible hearing that because Rosa should have felt empowered to speak up. I told Rosa right there in the session that she was a valued part of our family and that her observations and care for Lily mattered deeply. Dr. Reeves helped us work through establishing clearer communication and making sure Rosa knew she had authority to protect Lily and speak up about concerns. By the end of the session, we all felt like we had a better understanding of how to move forward together. Over the next few days, mutual friends started reaching out with messages from Marlena. She wanted me to know I was ruining her daughter's life over what she called a parenting disagreement. One friend forwarded me a long text where Marlena claimed Diane was just trying to instill healthy habits and that I was overreacting because Rosa had manipulated me. Another friend called saying Marlena was telling everyone at their church that I'd turned violent and thrown Diane out without cause. I ignored the first few attempts, but when Marlena started showing up at my office building trying to catch me in the parking lot, I had enough. I asked Kurt to send her a formal letter through his law firm. The letter explained in clear terms that starving a 7-year-old child and leaving bruises on her arms wasn't a misunderstanding or a difference in parenting philosophy. It was abuse, documented by medical professionals and being prosecuted by the state. The letter also stated that if Marlena contacted me, my friends, my workplace, or anyone else in my life again, I would pursue a restraining order against her just like the one Diane had. Kurt said the letter was delivered by certified mail, and Marlena signed for it herself. After that, the messages through friends stopped completely. 2 months had passed since Rosa's phone call changed everything. Lily woke up on a Tuesday morning, came downstairs for breakfast, and ate her whole bowl of cereal without any anxiety or hesitation. That night, she slept through until morning without any nightmares. The same thing happened Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and through the weekend. On Monday evening, Rosa pulled me aside after Lily went to bed and pointed out that this was the first full week without nightmares since the incident. I hadn't even realized it because I'd gotten so used to the 2 a.m. wake-ups and the comfort routine we'd developed. Lily was back at the school full-time now, and her teacher sent home notes saying she was participating in class discussions and playing with friends at recess. The school counselor reported that Lily seemed much more relaxed and was asking for snacks at appropriate times without hoarding food in her desk anymore. The biggest change came when Lily asked to join an after-school art club that met twice a week. She'd always loved drawing but had stopped completely during the months with Diane. Now she was bringing home colorful paintings of flowers and animals, taping them up all over the refrigerator. At our next therapy appointment, I mentioned the progress to Maddie. She smiled but cautioned me that healing wasn't a straight line. Setbacks would happen, maybe triggered by something small or seemingly random. The important thing was that Lily was building resilience and learning she had people who would help her through the hard moments. Maddie said this week of progress was huge and worth celebrating, but we needed to stay consistent with therapy and support, even when things seemed better. The divorce mediation happened in a conference room at Kurt's law firm. Diane showed up with her lawyer, a middle-aged man in an expensive suit who immediately started pushing for spousal support. He argued that Diane had given up her job to be a full-time stepmother and deserved financial compensation for the 4 months of marriage. Kurt didn't even wait for me to respond. He pulled out a folder containing bank statements showing Diane's spending patterns during our marriage. $30,000 on spa treatments, designer clothes, expensive restaurant meals with her friends, and a weekend trip to a resort that I hadn't even known about. Kurt also presented copies of the criminal charges filed against her, Dr. Moody's medical report documenting Lily's malnutrition and bruises, and Rosa's photos of the locked pantry and thrown-away lunches. The mediator, an older woman who'd been doing this for 20 years, looked over everything carefully. She asked Diane's lawyer if he had any evidence that Diane had actually performed stepmother duties rather than abusing her position in the household. He didn't have anything except Diane's word, which wasn't worth much given the criminal case. The mediator recommended that Diane receive nothing beyond the return of her personal belongings that she'd brought into the marriage. No spousal support, no share of assets, nothing. Diane's face went red and she started yelling that this was unfair, that I was trying to destroy her because I believed a housekeeper over my own wife. The mediator calmly explained that the evidence was clear and that Diane should consider herself fortunate. The recommendation wasn't worse given the circumstances. Diane stood up, knocked her chair over, and stormed out of the mediation room. Her lawyer gathered his papers, apologized quietly, and followed her out. Kurt looked at me across the table and said this was actually good news because it meant Diane had no leverage and we could move forward with the divorce on our terms. 3 days after the failed mediation, Wiley called me at work. He said their investigation had uncovered something interesting about Diane's employment history. She'd told me during our courtship that she'd left her previous job at a marketing firm because she wanted a change of pace, maybe start her own consulting business. That was a lie. Wiley's team had contacted her former employer and learned that Diane was actually fired 18 months ago. The reason was a pattern of bullying toward a younger female coworker who was 22 and had just started at the company. According to the HR records Wiley obtained through a subpoena, Diane had made constant comments about this coworker's appearance, weight, and clothing choices. She'd excluded the woman from team meetings, stolen credit for her work, and eventually pushed her so hard that the coworker filed a formal complaint. The company investigated, found multiple witnesses who confirmed the behavior, and terminated Diane's employment. The young coworker ended up leaving the company anyway because the damage was already done. Wiley explained that this pattern was important for the prosecution's case. It showed that Diane specifically targeted vulnerable people who couldn't easily fight back. A 7-year-old child, a housekeeper who needed her job, a junior employee trying to establish her career. This wasn't about parenting or personality conflicts. This was about power and control over people Diane perceived as weaker than herself. The prosecutor was planning to introduce this employment history at trial to demonstrate a pattern of abusive behavior. Wiley said it significantly strengthened their case and made it much harder for Diane's lawyer to claim this was an isolated incident or a misunderstanding about parenting styles. On Saturday morning, I asked Lily if she wanted to visit Mommy's grave. We hadn't been since before I married Diane, and I thought it might be time. Lily nodded and went to pick flowers from our garden to bring. The cemetery was quiet when we arrived, just a few other people scattered among the headstones visiting their own loved ones. Audrey's grave was in a peaceful spot under a large oak tree. Her headstone had her name, dates, and the words, "Beloved wife and mother," that I'd chosen 2 years ago. Lily knelt down in the grass and arranged her flowers carefully at the base of the stone. Then she started talking to Audrey like she was right there listening. She said she was sorry for letting the bad lady into their house. She said she should have told Daddy sooner what was happening, but she was scared and didn't want to get in trouble. I knelt down next to Lily and put my arm around her shoulders. Tears were running down my face as I tried to explain that none of this was her fault. I told her I was the one who should have protected her better, who should have seen what Diane was really like before I brought her into our home. I promised Audrey out loud that I would take better care of our daughter, that I would never let anyone hurt her like that again. Lily leaned against me and we both cried for a while. Before we left, we each touched Audrey's headstone and promised we'd take better care of each other going forward. The drive home was quiet, but felt lighter somehow, like we'd both needed to acknowledge what happened and recommit to being there for each other. Rosa's daughter came home from college for a long weekend. Her name was Maria, and she was studying nursing at a state school 3 hours away. Maria had always been polite to me, but we'd never talked much beyond basic greetings. On Sunday afternoon, while Lily was at a friend's house for a playdate, Maria asked if she could speak with me privately. We sat in the living room and she thanked me for standing up for her mother when Diane assaulted her. Maria said Rosa hadn't told her own family what really happened because she didn't want them to worry or feel like they needed to get involved. Rosa had just said there was some tension with my new wife and that things were being worked out. Maria only learned the full truth when the police contacted Rosa for her formal statement, and Maria happened to be home for spring break. She saw the bruise on her mother's arm and demanded to know what happened. Maria told me that Rosa had been afraid to push back against Diane too hard because she needed her job to help pay for Maria's college tuition. Rosa had been sending money every month to help cover what Maria's financial aid didn't, and losing that income would have meant Maria might need to take a semester off. I had no idea Rosa was supporting Maria's education, or that she'd felt trapped between protecting Lily and keeping her job. I told Maria that from now on, if she ever needed help with tuition or expenses, she should come to me. Rosa had been part of our family for 8 years and had literally put herself in harm's way to protect my daughter. The least I could do was make sure her daughter could finish school without Rosa having to worry about money. Maria started crying and hugged me, saying her mom had been right that I was a good person who'd just made one bad choice in trusting Diane. 3 months after everything started, Diane's lawyer finally called Kurt to say she was ready to accept the divorce terms. Kurt said Diane had apparently realized she had no leverage and no realistic chance of getting anything in court. The final divorce decree gave her nothing except her personal belongings. No spousal support, no share of any assets acquired before or during the marriage, nothing. The decree also included permanent restraining orders that required Diane to stay 500 feet away from me, Lily, Rosa, and our home. There was a special clause that Kurt insisted on including, which stated that Diane could never seek custody or visitation rights with Lily under any circumstances. Even if she completed all her court-ordered classes and probation, even if years passed and she claimed to be reformed, she would never have legal access to my daughter again. Kurt explained that this clause was unusual, but given the severity of the abuse and Lily's age, the judge had agreed to include it. The divorce would be final in 30 days once all the paperwork was processed. I felt relieved, but also strange. 4 months ago, I'd thought I was building a new family with someone who would help me raise Lily. Now I was right back where I started as a single father, except with trauma and legal bills and the knowledge that I'd failed to protect my daughter from someone I'd invited into our home. 4 months after Diane was first charged, her criminal trial was scheduled to begin. Kurt called me the week before to say I should prepare to testify and that it might be difficult to hear Diane's lawyer try to minimize what happened. But 2 days before the trial was supposed to start, the prosecutor called me directly. Diane's lawyer had approached them that morning with a plea deal offer. Diane would plead guilty to child endangerment and simple assault instead of the more serious charges originally filed. In exchange, she would get 2 years of probation instead of potential jail time. The plea deal also required her to complete anger management classes and parenting classes, even though she'd never be allowed near Lily again. She had to pay restitution covering all of Lily's therapy costs so far and projected future costs, plus Rosa's medical bills from the arm injury and lost wages from the days she had to miss work dealing with police interviews and court appearances. The prosecutor explained that they'd originally charged her with felony child abuse, but Diane's lawyer had been filing motions and building a defense that might create reasonable doubt with a jury. Some people still believed that parents had a right to control their children's eating, and Diane's lawyer was going to argue she was just trying to prevent childhood obesity. The prosecutor was confident they'd win at trial, but trials were unpredictable. This plea deal guaranteed that Diane would have a criminal record, would be under court supervision for 2 years, and would have to publicly admit guilt to what she did. The prosecutor asked what I thought. I said I wanted to talk to Rosa before deciding. I sat down with Rosa that evening after Lily was asleep and explained the plea deal offer. Rosa listened carefully, asked a few questions about what the probation would actually require Diane to do, and then was quiet for a long time. Finally, she said that what mattered most to her was that Diane had to admit publicly that she hurt Lily and hurt Rosa. The original charges were more serious, but they also meant a trial where Diane's lawyer would try to make Rosa look like a jealous employee and make Lily look like a spoiled child. Rosa said she didn't want to put Lily through testifying if we could avoid it. The plea deal meant Diane would stand in front of a judge and plead guilty, and that guilty plea would be on her record forever. Anyone who did a background check would see that she'd abused a child and assaulted someone. Rosa also liked that Diane had to pay for Lily's therapy and Rosa's medical costs because it meant Diane couldn't just walk away without consequences. The punishment felt light considering what Diane had done, but Rosa said she'd seen enough people get away with worse to know that any criminal record and court supervision was better than nothing. I called the prosecutor back and said we supported the plea deal. He scheduled the plea hearing for the following week. The plea hearing was short and procedural. Diane stood in front of the judge with her lawyer next to her. The judge asked if she understood the charges and if she was pleading guilty freely without coercion. Diane said yes in a quiet voice. The judge asked her to state for the record what she had done. Diane had to say out loud that she had endangered a child in her care by withholding food and that she had assaulted another person. The judge accepted her guilty plea and sentenced her to 2 years of probation with all the conditions the prosecutor had outlined. Diane's lawyer tried to make a statement about how his client was remorseful and had learned from this experience, but the judge cut him off and said the court wasn't interested in hearing excuses. The judge looked directly at Diane and told her that she was fortunate the victim's family had agreed to this plea deal because the evidence would have supported much more serious consequences. Diane nodded and kept her eyes down. After the hearing ended, I saw her in the courthouse hallway talking to her mother. Marlena was crying and hugging Diane, telling her it would be okay. Diane saw me watching and quickly looked away. I took Lily's hand and walked out of the courthouse, glad that this part was finally over. Maddie said Lily was ready to process the court outcome in a therapeutic way. We scheduled a special session where Lily would write a letter to Diane that she would never actually send. Maddie explained that this exercise would help Lily express her feelings and reclaim some sense of power over what had happened to her. In the therapy room, Maddie gave Lily colored pencils and nice paper. She told Lily she could write anything she wanted to say to the bad lady, and that no one would ever make her send it or read it out loud if she didn't want to. Lily thought for a few minutes, then started writing carefully in her best handwriting. When she finished, she showed it to Maddie, who read it and nodded with approval. Lily then asked if she could read it to me. I said of course. Lily read in a clear voice that she wasn't fat, that she deserved to eat when she was hungry, and that she was glad the bad lady couldn't come back to her house anymore. She also wrote that she hoped the bad lady would learn to be nicer to people, but that she never wanted to see her again. After Lily finished reading, Maddie asked her what she wanted to do with the letter. Lily said she wanted to rip it up and throw it away because she didn't want to keep anything that had Diane's name on it. So that's what we did, right there in the therapy office. Lily tore the letter into tiny pieces and threw them in the trash can. Then she smiled at me, a real genuine smile, and asked if we could get ice cream on the way home. House 2.